recorded.
Okay, yeah, and there's a good smattering of like different periods too, so that's good.
That's good. They're
Yeah.
listening to you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
We're on. Okay, hit me. So wait. So hi. It's Slow-Mo and some of Slow-Mo's new friends. I think you've met me, but if you haven't, I'm Jason Sylvan. I'm a professor at Texas A&M University in the Department of Oceanography, where I study microbes, bacteria, archaea, some phytoplankton, things like that live in the ocean. Oh, and I answer your questions. They're going to come from a mysterious voice off screen.
Hello, this is your teacher. Okay, you ready for the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so Romeo wants to know, what are some things that identify microbes?
Oh, that's right. That's a good question. Okay, so we get a sample from the ocean or of a rock from below the seafloor, right? And we want to know, how do we identify these microbes? So there's a few ways that you can do this. You can look at their DNA, and every organism, right, has a genome, and everybody's genome is identical or unique to that particular organism. So one thing we could do is look at the whole genome or parts of the genome to identify what that organism is. We can also use a microscope, and with microbes it's hard because they're really small and most of them are only one of a few shapes, so there's not a lot, but there's certain tests you could do to look at like what type of membrane they have and some other physical aspects of them.
Hashanti wants to know, what did you have to do to be where you're at?
Okay, so to be a professor at a university, I had to go to college. So I went to, I grew up in New York, went to high school, and then went to Brandeis University, which is a college outside Boston, it's near Boston in Massachusetts. And then I went to grad school, actually started right where I'm standing in this very lab, but then finished at Rutgers University. So I got a master's and a PhD. You don't have to get a master's. I just got both. And so I had to get a PhD, and then theoretically that would be enough. But I also did a postdoc, which is kind of like an intern for a doctor. So it's this period after you have finished your PhD where you don't have your own lab yet. And then I got my own lab, and here I am.
And how long did that take you?
That took me, I was in grad school for 8 years, but again, that was 2 degrees. And it doesn't have to be that long. You could get a PhD in like 5 years. 5 to 6 years is about average. So, and undergrad is 4 years.
Okay, Juan Trevino wants to know, was science ever hard for you?
No, I'm really good at it. It's not true. Yes, of course, science is really hard a lot of the time. So I think it's a really good job if you're comfortable with uncertainty. If you want to come in and know what you're doing every single day, then this is not a good job. But one of the things we always tell people starting out in science, if they do something and it doesn't work out and they're all worried, is we say if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be research.
Brianna Valdez wants to know, do you ever get discouraged whenever you don't find microbes?
Sometimes. I mean, this goes along with, there are definitely times when the job is hard and you do something and it doesn't work, or you're looking for something and you can't find it. And I think success really in any field, in life in general, but in particular in science, is more about persistence than it is about smarts. And you know, if you look around, it's not always the smartest people that are successful, but it's the people who want it the most and work the hardest.
Javier wants to know, do the microbes that you have found multiply by sexual reproduction or asexually?
That's a really good question. So the microbes that I work with specifically mostly are prokaryotic, and most prokaryotic organisms are asexual, and so they split into 2 cells that have identical genomes.
Patrick wants to know, what encouraged you to become a microbiologist and a scientist?
So I'll take that in 2 parts. The scientist, it's just kind of what I always wanted to do, and so I can't really explain it, except that I've always been curious about how the world works, and I think that just kind of, if that's what your interest is, you tend towards some branch of science. The microbiologist came much later. I didn't know until I was in graduate school, so I went all the way through college thinking I wanted to study like fish and worms at hydrothermal vents. And just microbiology for me is interesting because microbes are the most abundant entities besides viruses on the planet, and so there's just so many of them, and they control so much of the environment that we live in that I wanted to understand how they do that.
Renee wants to know, what do the microorganisms eat?
That's also a really good question, and it totally, just like people, it totally depends on the microbe. And so the one that I discovered and got to name, that eats a variety of different carbon sources. And so it's a heterotroph, so it has to have carbon made by other organisms. But there are a lot of microbes that just take carbon dioxide and they make their own sugar, and they could do that using a variety of reactions like light as an energy source, or they could use chemicals as an energy source. And so there's, if you can think of it, there's probably something out there that eats it.
And Diana wants to know, how did you choose microbiology as your permanent job or career?
I think, so when I was in graduate school and I started studying microbes, just kind of this idea that they control so much of the environment became really interesting to me. It also happens that nowadays there's really kind of an explosion in microbial ecology. And so it's a big field that's growing, and so a lot of people that study the oceans are interested in the microbes in them, and that kind of was one of the reasons also, just because I started studying that, and then there were a lot of other people there studying it, and they're all doing interesting work, and so that was enough for me. And hang in there, because we're gonna move to a different part of the lab and answer more questions. I'm gonna come around this side. Press stop.